So the next part of the lesson, we will look at how to write a custom SQL query using the programmatic features of the Java Persistence API, or the JPA. So first, let's talk about why we even need to do this, right? Before, we talked about this wonderful ability of JPA in order to be able to have keywords that you use to write methods, and then under the hood, the code is generated for you automatically to do SQL queries. However, there are limitations to what you get out of the box. And for various reasons, which are somewhat mysterious, but we will demystify them, you can't define an SQL query method using the Spring Data API that combines containing and in. So what I wanted to be able to do here was be able to check to see whether or not this is basically the feature where you can select the you can query things that are in the queries. Remember how we had implemented something earlier where we programmatically wrote the regular expression that would search for either any or all of the elements in the query string in the quotes? You can't do that with the Spring Data API. If you try to do it, it'll yell at you and say, sorry, this does not compute. You can't do that. Now, why? That's a good question. When I first stumbled upon this last year, when I was developing this part of the course, I was like, why can't you do this? And I searched long and hard and could never find a good explanation of it in any feasible way. But ChatGPT was out, so I said, why can't Spring Data API methods combine containing and in? And it generated a response. And actually, it was kind of fun because this is the response it generated last year, which was useful, but rather pithy. And then this morning, I did the same query, and it came up with a much more detailed explanation, which I stuck here, and I'll just keep it around in case you want to go look at it. You can do it yourself, of course. The point is, it's getting much better at explaining things because it learns over time. So this explains why you can't do that. Now, I'm not entirely sure I believe everything in the explanation, not that ChatGPT is wrong, but it seems like it could be done, but for whatever reason, it's not done. And to the earlier point, good luck trying to Google this. If you do a Google search, trying to figure out why you can't combine containing and in, I was never able to find a sensible answer, but ChatGPT gave me an answer right away that seemed quite plausible. So, given the motivation for why we need to have a way to combine these things, let's talk about how we're going to implement this. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to define something called the MultiQueryRepository, which is an interface that we write, and this is our interface for creating a custom query. And what this interface does is it defines a way to perform multiple queries at once on the quote database to take into account the fact that you don't get this feature out of the box with JPA. And then what we're going to do is we're going to write our own method, which is what we would like to have done with Spring Data API, but it doesn't work. And we're going to say, find all by quote containing IgnoreCaseAllIn. So it's going to find a list of quote objects in the database that contain all of the queries that are in this query list. Can't get that out of the box. We're going to write our own way to do this. So that's the interface we define. And then what we do is we apply something called the repository implementation pattern. Once again, an absolutely fascinating example of how people look for commonality in use cases, and then they bake those patterns into features in languages or frameworks. So this is called the repository implementation pattern. You can read about that pattern here. And what we do is we say the MultiQueryRepository impl class implements the MultiQueryRepository interface. And that is a flag, it's an indicia, an indicator to Spring that this is the implementation that goes along with that interface. And then we have to do a whole bunch of other gobbledygook, which I'll talk about briefly here and we'll look at when we look at the code, where we define this thing called an entity manager, which defines a database session that will be used by our programmatic implementation we're about to show to perform CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations, and query the database. So this is how we're going to do this. This is now going to be done programmatically. And here is the bulk of the implementation. I'm not going to walk through it right now. It's very complicated, but it's very cool. And so find all by quote containing ignore case all in. That's our method. It's going to find quote objects in the database that contain all the queries in the list of strings that are the query's parameter. And it will ignore the case. And I'll show you how we use it first, and we'll show you later. We'll walk through the implementation. But basically, this is how you programmatically can build queries. So it's a query builder, if you will. And we create the queries, and then we go look up in the database, and it does what our query told it to do, which is very, very, very powerful. Not the easiest thing to do, but once again, ChatGPT helped considerably. I worked with an independent study student to get the basic features working. He figured out the basic mechanisms to build all the pieces and use the repository implementation pattern and so on. And then we worked together with ChatGPT to simplify the code, and it's really, really, really cool. But not the kind of thing you could easily figure out how to do without using tools to help you. So that's a quick walkthrough, very high-level walkthrough of how to build custom queries. And you'll get a chance to do that for what you're implementing in one of the upcoming assignments.